What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchbalia sitting on the couch making some money investing in fractional real estate online as usual. Today I am doing a Mogul video, but I'm not wearing the Mogul hat. I already had their shirt on and thought that would be overkill. I want to make sure it's clear. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, other than I invest in properties on their platform. They are my favorite platform at the moment to invest on, especially for long-term real estate, long-term investment property holds. I think that there's really not another site that I think is a close second at the moment. That being said, I am going to be a little bit critical of something that they did, and more based around their communications than the actual result. But I think that it's important, even when I do have favorites on here. I'm going to try to always give you my honest opinion, and if there is something to criticize, I want to share that with you. Today was their webinar. If you're not watching their monthly webinar, I highly suggest that you do so. They always, put out good information as far as what they're thinking about, what's coming up on the platform. Today they shared a new property, the Freeman. Almost a third of the equity sold out during the webinar, at least over 25%, but close to a third. I'm going to try to get a video out on this property, just my regular due diligence videos, but it is a pad split in Houston. Hopefully I can get one out before it sells out. I plan to do it tomorrow. We will see. But remember, they do just keep pumping out good deals, so you don't have to jump on one if you don't have time to do the due diligence. I think it's really reckless to just buy as soon as the link is available. I know there are some people doing that. I guess the thought is they're just getting as wide a diversification as possible and buying into every single one. Maybe. I don't know. I think that is, honestly, on this platform, I don't think it's a terrible strategy, but over time it could become one if everybody's doing that and nobody's really being selective, and then that could lead to the overall quality going down over time if it just turns out that they can sell anything that they want, right? And so, not that I think that's the direction the site's going, but I do think it's important that we're all, looking critically at these properties, really trying to understand, is this a deal or not? Does it fit into my particular portfolio or not? My risk tolerance. And so, anyway, really freaks me out that people buy so much of it just as soon as that link is available. I would love to see more people do, I think that's what happened on sites like Lofty, where early on they could sell anything, and so they did sell anything. I don't think that's what these guys at Mogul are doing. I mean, on average, even the deals that I don't buy, I typically think, okay, that's not a terrible deal. It's just not for me. So anyway, that deal came out. That's not really what I want to talk about today. They did mention a couple of things that I thought were interesting. They and more just hinted at a few things. And I'll get into the one thing that I thought was a little problematic after just touching on a couple of things. They talked about the secondary market again, which we're getting closer to 2026, right? So I think we should see that. And I think the last time we heard from them, that it might be Q2 2026. It'll be interesting to see if they are on, if that happens as scheduled. The other thing they mentioned at having a bunch of different thoughts about ways that you could recapitalize, as far as, so they were talking about, they have thought through ways for us to do 1031 exchanges when it's time to sell the property in real life. And, they mentioned a drop and swap. Sometime I might do a video and kind of explain what that is, but it doesn't, you don't really have to understand it to know, whether or not we can do it. But essentially knowing that they're looking at that, right, thinking about that, but that's going to be when it comes time to sell some of these properties. So we're pretty far out from that. But also other ways to sort of recapitalize our portfolio. They mentioned maybe borrowing against our interest in the platform. I thought that's pretty interesting. It's the first time I heard them mention that specifically. And then also they really quickly just mentioned something that sounded maybe like they're thinking about doing some sort of liquidity pool as well. Similar to, and I don't know, I mean, it was very just hinted at, but it made me think that they're thinking of something maybe similar to the Lofty liquidity pools. Hopefully the execution is not the same if that's what they do, because I have not done well. I guess my most recent investments in those liquidity pools have been okay, but they feel like they're more problem than they're worth. So hopefully, if they do something like that, they have a little bit different execution. My guess is that they will. I mean, so far, I've been really happy in how they've done most stuff. And I guess that's going to get me to, let me just get straight to what I didn't really like, right? So if we have I got this email saying, hey, good news for your investment in the Swift. That's the whole thing that I don't like, right? That they presented this as good news. They said, okay, we received an exemption so we can get a higher loan to value, meaning that we're taking an 80% loan instead of a 75% loan, as like we were originally supposed to. But the reason that we had to do that is because the appraisal came in at $20,000 below the purchase price. So this was something I didn't really like. So in the contract, we did have an appraisal contingency. So we had the right to back out when this came in $20,000 low. This comes up all the time, right? This is something that you're just going to run into if you're in the real estate investing business. When it does come up, usually the first thing that I do is go to the seller and say, hey, we agreed to pay too much for this property. We need you to lower the price. And then if they do that, then bam, that would have been great news, right? And that's similar. We had a similar message that came in on the Alcaraz. There was an appraisal issue. They got a price reduction. It wasn't for the full amount of the difference, though, and so then they're also doing some other things. But very similar to what they're doing here. But the Swift is more straightforward, right? There was no price reduction. This isn't actually good news, right? It's good news that they were able to address it, right? Okay, turns out maybe we're overpaying for the real estate. What they did, okay, let's bump up the leverage a little bit. We got an exemption. We can do 80% LTV. Which really just means that we're still paying the same amount for the property. We're borrowing. It looks like we're actually borrowing a little bit more now, but we're just doing it because the value, the increase in LTV, was greater than the decrease in the total value, and so it made it so we can get a little bit more loan proceeds. So it's not really changing the deal. Other than, it does increase, they said, okay, the net impact was a slight increase in the IRR. And so part of what they did is they're saying, okay, well, we're itemizing the furnishings and saying that they approximately valued at $25,000. So what do they really mean by that, right? This is really common when we're buying properties. Like I help clients buy short-term rentals all the time. When we are making that purchase, a lot of times I'm giving them zero credit for the furniture, fixture, and equipment. If you ever see me write FF&E, that's what that stands for, furniture, fixture, equipment. That really mostly comes from, I used it the most in the hotel industry, but I think it works, it applies in short-term rentals because it's very similar, right? And so normally I'm just trying to offer what I think the property's worth and give them no credit for the FF&E. Obviously, a lot of sellers spent tons of money on their FF&E and want to get a real big premium for it, and so that's always a little bit of a negotiation up front. Oftentimes, if it's a sticking point, one of the things that we can do is say, okay, as long as our appraisal is within X, we'll go ahead and close on this, right? And that's so it's not strange at all to give them some credit, and in this case, $25,000 doesn't seem like, it's beyond the realm of what's very reasonable. I mean, like if you look at this property, if you were going to furnish this, if you were going to put in all the linens, all the personal property, right? The plates, the appliances, the pool table. Now, obviously, if you were going to go out and just buy all this stuff and put it in there, oftentimes my clients are spending $50,000 to $80,000 to outfit a property like this, and so $25,000 doesn't seem like a lot. You got your little chess set in the backyard. I mean, once you start to add all this stuff up, TVs, just everything, it very quickly seems like a ton of money. On the flip side, when the seller's trying to sell it, our argument to them is like, okay, look, if we just buy the house, what are you doing with all this stuff? If you sell it at a yard sale, you'll be lucky to get $5,000, right? And so that argument has worked really well for us over the years, but less and less so, because as short-term rentals become more of an established asset class, people are buying this as a business, just like we are here. And so to assign some value to that business, to the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that are necessary to run that business makes perfect sense. So I'm not at all upset at the outcome of this, right? I think, okay, we are actually having to pay for that stuff. We're doing it by adjusting the LTV, taking out a little bit higher loan, but guess what? We got to take even more proceeds than we were giving up from the lower value, so it increased our IRR a little bit. I just would have liked this to come out, to be a little bit more honest in the delivery, right? Like, okay, it's bad news, right? It's not good news. It turns out we're paying more for this property than the appraiser thought it was worth on this particular day. I mean, that's something to keep in mind, right? It is just one appraiser's opinion of value for a specific day. When I was reviewing this property, I thought we would end up having some problem, or that we could potentially have some problems with the appraisal, because they have this extra, there's like a outbuilding, right? That you don't know how they're valuing this extra building. Valuing properties with pools is always a little problematic. So there's all these different little reasons that maybe you could have a tougher time with the appraisal. But so we did have, so that's not great news, right? It didn't appraise for what we agreed to pay for it. I just, if they had been upfront about that and said, but guess what? We figured it out. We're going to take a little bit higher LTV. We're just basically saying we're giving them credit for the furniture. Bam. I would have been perfectly happy. I wouldn't have had any question. But I did want to ask them about this. And because one of the things I don't like, that we're making these investments with the assumption that we have these, an appraisal contingency. And then, okay, here's one where the contingency could have been triggered, and Mogul on their own decided not to, right? They just came up with a solution and they moved forward without consulting everybody who had already agreed to invest in it. Like, hey, this deal is actually changing. Maybe that's something that we should know about and decide, do we want to invest in this or not? But in answering my question about this, Joey actually acknowledged that that could be something, that's problematic. And so what he had mentioned is, if this scenario had come up and it was going to change the deal in a way that was actually hurting the IRR, right? Like, if it changed the deal and they couldn't, they weren't able to, they didn't have this solution that made it so it actually increased the IRR. If it had actually hurt our returns, then there would have needed to be a vote from the people who had already invested in it. And so I was very glad to hear that, because I think that it's important to understand exactly where we stand as far as, like, okay, once we agree to invest in this, how much can that deal change before we can change our mind, right? Or before there's at least some ability to, have a voice in that decision. And so understanding that if it had impacted it to the point where it was going to hurt our returns, that there would have been some sort of vote, or maybe they just would have not done it, right? And so I was really glad to hear that. I'm kind of on the fence about, I think increasing the LTV, I mean, that's a pretty material decision to make, right? Like, they have mentioned in the future, if we're going to refinance, that's something that there would be a vote on, for a refinance or a sale. But so moving the LTV feels like that's a move that I'm not sure I'm comfortable, knowing that, if it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because, like, okay, what if they had one that was under contract for let's say 60% LTV, and then, okay, we move it up to 80. Well, that's a huge move, right? 75 to 80 is just, it doesn't feel that material. So I kind of am okay with it. But I was really glad to hear, how they thought through it. Obviously they did, if they had the ability to get the seller to move, they would have. It seemed like that was just not the case. On the, the Alcaraz one, they were able to get the seller to move some, so that was good. And so, changing the LTV seems like it was their only real option. And again, it didn't, it didn't have a negative impact on the projected returns. I am curious if they adjusted their reversion amount for the property, right? If they're expecting the sale in the future to be different, based on. I should have gone back and looked at, the analysis when I bought in versus did they change that analysis tab now? So anyway, really all it is the messaging, right? And I think that's when I have been critical of them in the past. It's been mostly about, I feel like their marketing is very aggressive. Sometimes things like this just don't feel good to me, right? Like, I don't want you to tell me this is good news when, I just found out my property didn't appraise for what I agreed to pay for it. To me, that's not good news, right? Because yield is temporary, basis is forever. It should have been like, hey, we had small problem, property didn't appraise, not a big deal. We figured out, here's the solution. All the same info, but I would have felt a lot better about the delivery. But I might not have then gone and asked the question. So I was glad. The thing that I'm most glad about is hearing that if it had been a change that ended up being having a negative impact on our IRR, that's when they believe it would have triggered. It would have been necessary to have some sort of vote about it, and that's the protection I really want to know. So it's good to know now, though, that when I'm looking at these deals, I always have been somewhat critical of valuations and really trying to understand them. And I'm going to have to be even a little bit more so, knowing that they can just change the LTV to make up for a low appraisal. That changes the risk a little bit in my mind in the way that I'm going to look at these deals. Overall, I'm still very much on the same page and the way these guys look at these things. I don't, like I said, I don't think it's at all out of line to be, assigning some portion of the value to the FF&E. Like I said, I've done that in real life numerous times. Obviously it's best when you don't have to do it. And this actually leads me to one more thing that they brought up in the webinar, and I think is important. And so, one of the things as a buyer like Mogul, we are kind of in a, we don't have the best bargaining position with sellers, because if they know the setup that we have, they know that Mogul's already gone out and spent money, created the entity, raised equity, gone through a lot of trouble to get to that point, right? It's not so easy for us to just say, oh, we're going to walk away because we have this contingency. Now, obviously, we're not going to buy a bad deal. If something really, really terrible comes up, yeah. If it had come in 100,000 low, 50,000 low, I don't think that they would have, tried to come up with a similar solution, right? It's sort of like on the Alcaraz, yeah, no, we need the seller to work with us a little bit, right? But I do think we can kind of see some savvy sellers really take a little bit of advantage of the position that Mogul is in. But this is one of the things Mogul was talking about, how quickly they're selling out on a lot of these offerings, and how that's going to put them in a better position for acquisitions. And I think this is what they're talking about, right? Like, one, a lot of these closings have had very long timelines because they knew it was going to take a long time to raise the funds to buy. And so, anytime you're doing something like that for, the seller is giving up time for you, basically, right? They're holding off on they're not getting a quick close, and they're getting, in some of these cases, it's been, several months to close. In those instances, we're necessarily just not getting the best possible deal from that seller, because we're not, there's always going to be trade-offs, right? If we need them to do something for us, like take a longer, give us a little more time to close, then there's always going to be a trade-off, like whether it's just not getting the absolute best pricing, whatever it is. And so seeing that they're able to just sell these deals out so quickly now is going to put them in a situation where they can just be a little bit more aggressive on timing. And I think it'll help make, get even better deals. And so I think that they sort of hinted at that, or they mentioned, hey, the fact that we're selling out puts us in a better position for acquisitions. And I think that that's really what they were talking about, right? Is we're no longer going to be in this spot where we need this extra time from sellers to be sure that we're going to raise the equity. And I think by being in that spot, it also doesn't tip our hand so much to sellers that, hey, it is this big process that we go through to raise equity, because when the appraisal comes in, we're kind of further along in the process. And so having, so they, if they understand the business model, they know, that money's already raised and it was a big process, right? But if it turns out, no, they just raised the money in 2 days, well, then all of a sudden it doesn't seem like as big of a deal, and maybe doesn't give the seller, or maybe not the perceived leverage from the seller's point of view that there might have been in some of these ones where it's like, no, it's going to take us 3 months to raise the equity. I'm thinking about some of the bigger deals, right, where they had several months before the closing, and I think that, I'm assuming that's why. It's because they knew it was going to take a little while to sell out. Anyway, so in general, I think it's good news. Anytime I can come up with something to complain about them, I'm going to, because I want to make sure it's clear. Like, even though it's my favorite platform at the moment, it's still, you still have to do your own due diligence. Before I forget, please like and subscribe. In the description of this video, I have links to all the places where I'm currently investing in fractional real estate online, including Mogul. But you want to do your own due diligence on all of those platforms and any of the properties you see me talk about investing in. Just because I buy them doesn't mean that you should. It definitely doesn't mean that they're going to be successful. I've bought some deals that haven't been the best deals. I've definitely, I try to share all that information whenever possible. And it is early, right? For all of these platforms, I've only been investing in Mogul not even quite a year yet, and some of the platforms a little over a year. It's going to be a long time before I'm really comfortable. Now, why? The reason I always say I like Mogul the best. Well, I think the way they think about real estate investing, it just aligns with my worldview of how you find deals that make sense, right? And how they have consistently done the things that they say they're going to do. If you are invested in the WAGs, you should definitely watch that section of the webinar as well. They just talked a little bit more about the title insurance claim that's going on with that. I'm not going to get into that. I think I've done a separate video about it, but anyway, that's just an aside. I wanted to mention, if you didn't watch that, you might want to, if you're invested in the WAGs. And it's just another example of, I think they're very professional, and they're going about these, they're looking for deals that I think are great deals, right? They're not just trying to buy any old property out there, throw it on their platform. They're trying to make sure they're deals that have a high enough yield that they can put debt on them and still be, have it be accretive debt, have it make it so that we're getting truly all the benefits of real estate investing, which leverage is one of the biggest ones. So anyway, I think that I was trying to caution you against like being too excited about them, because I am, and then I went back into why I really like them. So I don't know. I think that only time is really going to tell how a lot of these work out. And I have, I've shared in the last couple months of my dividends. They haven't been as great as they were in the earlier months. There are some explanations for that. So we'll have to see how that goes going forward. But yeah, the biggest thing for me is sometimes I think that their messaging is just too salesy, too markety, too optimistic. I would have loved it if they said, hey, we've got bad news, but we're taking care of it. Like, that would have made this just feel so much better to me. Don't tell me it's good news when my appraisal came in low. That's it. That's the whole video. That's all I have to say about that. Until next time, I'm going to keep making mistakes. So, let me know what you think about that. Is that just me being like a grumpy old guy who thinks, how you say what you say is just as important as what you're actually telling me? Or is that just like, they gave us all the info, let them spin it however they want? What do you think? Put it in the comments. Jump in the Discord. Oh yeah, I've got a Discord set up. The link to that is also in the description of this video. If you want to join that, talk about any of these platforms, feel free. Now I think I'm really done. Till next time, going to keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.